Stalingrad, Russia, October 1942. A German infantry battalion commander had survived 4 years of war. Poland, France, the opening drives of Barbarossa across the western steppe. He had walked through artillery barrages that had killed men standing next to him. He had directed assaults across open ground under Soviet mortar fire. He had done the things that battalion commanders were required to do, and he had survived them. On the morning of October 14th, he did not eat breakfast in his forward command post. He ate it in a basement, 50 metres further back than his usual position, away from the window, away from the doorframe, crouched below the level of the aperture, while his adjutant passed him the reports from the night's activity. He was not responding to artillery. There was no barrage that morning. He was responding to a single Soviet sniper who had been operating in his battalion sector for 11 days. The sniper had not killed him. The sniper had killed his signals officer, his forward artillery observer, a visiting engineer lieutenant who had spent 4 hours at the position the previous afternoon, 3 NCOs who had crossed the open ground between the command post and the forward trenches at intervals across 5 separate days. The battalion commander was not wounded. He was not in immediate danger by any formal military assessment. He was unable to function. That was the point. That had always been the point. Artillery killed soldiers. Soviet snipers at Stalingrad had discovered something more precise, that killing the right soldiers in the right sequence did not reduce a German unit's strength. It reduced its ability to think. To understand what Soviet snipers did to German command structures at Stalingrad, you need to understand what the Red Army had learned about its own weakness in the first year of the war. June 1941. Operation Barbarossa opened with coordinated German strikes that destroyed Soviet command and control faster than units could respond. The mechanism was not simply superior firepower. It was the systematic removal of the people who connected firepower to decision. Soviet officers died in the opening weeks at rates that left entire divisions functionally leaderless. Units with men, weapons, and ammunition stood in place and were destroyed because no one with authority to issue orders was alive to issue them. The Red Army's post-1941 analysis of its own catastrophic losses produced a specific conclusion. Modern military units were not destroyed only by attrition. They were destroyed by the removal of the nodes that made attrition survivable: the commanders, the communicators, the specialists who translated chaos into coordinated response. Soviet military planners had identified this vulnerability in their own forces. They then looked at German units and asked a direct question: what would happen if we did this to them deliberately? The sniper program that emerged from this question was not a collection of talented individuals given rifles and permission to shoot. It was a systematic doctrine built around a specific target hierarchy. Officers first, then NCOs, then specialists, radio operators, artillery observers, engineers, medical personnel. The targeting sequence was not random. It was designed to produce a specific effect inside the unit being engaged. Not casualties, paralysis. Vasily Zaitsev is the name most associated with Soviet sniping at Stalingrad. He is not the most important part of the story. The most important part is what Zaitsev himself understood about his role. Zaitsev had grown up hunting in the Ural Mountains. He understood patience, concealment, and the difference between shooting at targets and shooting at the right targets. When he arrived at Stalingrad in September 1942, he brought those instincts with him. What Stalingrad gave him was a doctrine to attach them to. By October 1942, Zaitsev had trained over 24 snipers using a method his trainees called the Sixes. 3 pairs of snipers, each pair a shooter and a scout, covering the same ground from 3 interlocking positions simultaneously. By November 1942, the 62nd Army had over 1,000 trained snipers operating in its sector. The German battalion commander eating breakfast in his basement was not facing one man with a rifle. He was facing a system. The weapon Soviet snipers carried at Stalingrad was the Mosin Nagant model 1891-30 with a Pu telescopic sight. It was not the most sophisticated sniper rifle of the war. The German Kar-98K with a Zeiss optic was, by technical evaluation, a more precisely manufactured weapon. The Mosin Nagant's trigger pull was heavier, its bolt throw was longer. The Pu sight, while functional, offered lower magnification than German equivalents. None of that was the relevant comparison. The relevant comparison was not rifle against rifle, it was doctrine against doctrine. German sniper deployment in 1942 was built around counter-sniper work and individual marksmanship. German snipers were skilled, patient, and effective at killing Soviet soldiers. What German sniper doctrine had not been built around was systematic targeting of command nodes as a primary operational objective. Soviet doctrine had been built around exactly that. The difference produced results that were not about the rifles at all. A German artillery barrage killed by blast radius and fragmentation. The mathematics were probabilistic. A shell landed. Men within a certain distance died or were wounded based on their position relative to the detonation. Officers died when they happened to be within that radius. The effect on command was a function of chance. A Soviet sniper killed by selection. The sniper in a German battalion sector was not choosing targets by proximity or opportunity. He was working through a list. The officer with the map case. The man at the radio. The figure who moved between positions with the authority that distinguishes commanders from the commanded. German units in Stalingrad began reporting a pattern that their training had not prepared them to analyse. Casualties were not distributed as artillery casualties were distributed. They were concentrated among specific personnel types. The men dying were not random soldiers. They were the men whose deaths created specific functional voids that could not be filled by rotating replacements into position. An artillery barrage that killed 6 soldiers reduced a company's strength by 6 men. A sniper who killed a company commander, his sergeant major, and his forward observer in 3 days across 11 shots did not reduce the company's strength by 3 men. It reduced the company's ability to function by a percentage that had no clean number. This was the mechanical advantage the Soviet sniper program had identified and exploited. Not lethality, precision lethality directed at the specific human infrastructure that made units capable of fighting rather than merely dying. Wehrmacht after-action reports from Stalingrad contain a consistency that crosses multiple divisions and multiple months of fighting. The language used to describe artillery is operational. Casualties, position losses, fire for effect. The language used to describe Soviet snipers is different. It is personal. German soldiers did not write about snipers the way they wrote about artillery. Artillery was weather. It arrived, it killed, it stopped, and the survivors reorganized and continued. Snipers were not weather. Snipers were intent. A sniper was a specific person in a specific position who had decided that you specifically should die today. This distinction between impersonal attrition and personal selection produced a psychological effect that German military planners had not formally accounted for. The German army's response to Soviet snipers was immediate, adaptive, and ultimately insufficient. Counter-sniper teams were deployed. German snipers were tasked specifically with locating and eliminating Soviet positions. This worked at the individual level. German snipers were skilled, and they killed Soviet snipers. The Scharfschütze program produced marksmen who could engage at ranges and in conditions that matched anything the Soviets deployed. What it could not do was address the system faster than the system regenerated. Zaitsev's training program was producing new snipers faster than German counter-sniper operations could remove them. Each Soviet sniper killed created a gap in a Soviet formation for approximately the time it took to rotate a trained replacement forward. Each German officer killed created a gap in a German formation for the time it took to identify, brief, and integrate a replacement. A process that, in the conditions of Stalingrad, could take days or weeks. The exchange rate was not in Germany's favour. German High Command issued formal guidance on sniper countermeasures that reached unit commanders in late 1942. Move irregularly. Do not establish patterns. Use covered routes between positions. Do not congregate officers in visible locations. Change command post positions frequently. Read the list carefully. Every item on it was a restriction on how German officers conducted their normal duties. The guidance did not tell officers how to defeat Soviet snipers. It told officers how to make themselves harder to kill. The distinction matters. A military command that is issuing instructions on how its officers should avoid being shot has already conceded that the sniper program is achieving its objective. German officers at Stalingrad began taking precautions that had no equivalent in their previous combat experience. Rank insignia was removed or covered in forward areas. The visible markers that Soviet snipers used to identify priority targets. Officers moved at irregular intervals. Briefings that would normally occur at forward positions were moved to covered locations. A German Hauptmann, a captain, commanding a rifle company in the factory district, described the adjustment in a letter written in November 1942. He had begun walking in a crouch through areas he had previously walked upright. He had moved his sleeping position 3 times in 2 weeks. He had stopped using the same route twice in succession. He wrote that he was more afraid of the silence than the shelling. When it shelled, he knew where the danger was. When it was silent, he did not know where the sniper was, and not knowing was worse than knowing. Artillery announced itself. A sniper did not. The broader impact of Soviet sniper doctrine extended beyond Stalingrad's specific geography. By 1943, the Red Army had formalized the sniper program into a structure that operated at every level of the front. Sniper schools produced graduates in cohorts. Target priority doctrine was standardized. The Sixes methodology Zaitsev had developed was incorporated into training curricula. The effect on German operational behavior was measurable in ways that went beyond casualty figures. German units on the Eastern Front in 1943 and 1944 exhibited command behaviors that had not been present in 1941. Forward command posts moved further from front lines than doctrine specified. Officer movement in forward areas decreased. The physical presence of senior NCOs and officers at critical points, the presence that combat doctrine across every army recognizes as essential for unit cohesion under fire, became a managed risk rather than a standard practice. This mattered more than it appeared to on paper. Military units function on the physical presence of leadership at decisive moments. A platoon commander who directs his men from a covered position 50 metres further back than optimal is not a cowardly officer. He is an officer who has correctly assessed that his death would damage his unit more than his absence from the precise forward position damages it. But that calculation, made individually by thousands of German officers across the Eastern Front, produced a cumulative effect on German tactical performance that no after-action report attributed to snipers because no single report could see the whole. Soviet snipers had not simply killed German officers. They had changed the behavior of the German officers they had not killed. That was the achievement that Zaitsev's doctrine had been designed for from the beginning. There is something precise to understand about what Soviet snipers exposed on the Eastern Front between 1942 and 1945. German military planning was not unsophisticated. The Wehrmacht had analysed every major form of combat it expected to encounter and had developed doctrine to address it. Artillery, air attack, armoured assault, anti-tank defence. The German military mind was systematic and thorough, and it had produced the most effective operational fighting force Europe had seen in the modern era. What it had not fully calculated was the specific cost of removing the human infrastructure that made that system function. Artillery planners counted bodies. Sniper doctrine counted roles. The difference between those two counting systems is the difference between reducing a unit's strength and reducing its capacity. A unit at 80% strength with its command structure intact fights at close to full effectiveness. A unit at full strength with its command structure systematically removed does not fight at full effectiveness. It mills. It waits. It responds to immediate threats without the coordination that converts response into result. Soviet sniper doctrine had identified this distinction before Stalingrad. Stalingrad gave it the conditions to prove it. The German battalion commander eating breakfast in his basement was not a coward. He was a competent officer who had correctly understood what was happening to his unit and had correctly understood that his survival was operationally necessary. His fear was rational. His adjustment was rational. And the Soviet sniper who had produced that adjustment had never fired a shot at him. He had simply killed the people around him in the right order. Artillery kills soldiers. The right sniper, with the right doctrine, kills an army's ability to be an army. At Stalingrad, the Red Army learned the difference. The German army learned it too. One of them learned it in time to matter.